Hello, I'm movie man Eric Houston, and tonight we are going to be looking at the birth of animation. Animated cartoons are, of course, as popular as they have ever been. And their history goes all the way back to the earliest days of motion pictures, specifically to 1906 and a man named James Stewart Blackton. He had been dispatched to interview Thomas Edison about Edison's new filmmaking ventures. Edison, ever the showman, invited Blackton into his movie studio. Now, Edison was well aware that Blackton also had a vaudeville career as a speed drawer. That's someone who would stand on stage and draw pictures really, really fast. He asked Blackton to do a speed drawing of Edison himself, and Edison filmed it. Now, Edison was as much a salesman as a showman and inventor, and he quickly sold the finished film to Blackton, along with 9 other Edison films. Blackton and his partner began using those films as part of their act to great effect. The next step, though, was for them to start producing their own films to go along with the act. They founded Vitagraph Studios in 1897, a studio which would go on to be the most prolific studio of the silent era. Blackton continued as a director and a performer for Vitagraph. But in 1906, with a film called Humorous Phases of Funny Faces, he decided to make those drawings move. In this and many of his other early drawing films, Blackton uses a blackboard to animate his characters rather than a series of paper drawings, as would become common later on in the history of animation. The first to do that, to use drawings on paper, would be Émile Cohl in 1908. Cohl was a French artist inspired by Blackton's Humorous Phases of Funny Faces, so much so that while his cartoon would be animated in that traditional way, black line drawings on white paper, he would end up reversing the colors of the image specifically to copy Blackton's blackboard style. As many animators in America and Europe, inspired by Blackton and Cohl, continued to experiment with hand-drawn animation, others began to experiment with stop-motion animation, moving objects one frame at a time rather than drawings. Among them is Russian Ladislaus Starowitz, the son of low-ranking Russian nobility who had gone into hiding, and later director of the Museum of Natural History in Lithuania. While there, Starowitz wanted to make a documentary short about the battle between 2 stag beetles. Unfortunately, when he placed the nocturnal insects under the bright studio lights, they quickly perished. He ultimately took a pair of the dead beetles, removed their limbs, and replaced the limbs with wires that he could then animate through stop motion to simulate the battle. This leads to a number of well-regarded stop-motion shorts. The most famous of these is The Cameraman's Revenge from 1912, a dark comedy about jealousy and infidelity. Starowitz's films were so masterful that some audiences even thought he was using trained insects rather than animation. Meanwhile, back in America, newspaper cartoonists are now getting in on the act. Now, this was a golden age of newspaper cartoons and comic strips, with many of the best comic strip authors becoming minor celebrities in their own right, both as artists and as vaudeville performers. One of them is Winsor McCay, a revolutionary cartoonist who invented a lot of the visual language still being used in comics today, particularly in his most popular strip, Little Nemo in Slumberland. McCay was also a vaudeville performer known for his chalk talk act. This was a style of performance where a lecturer would draw pictures on stage to emphasize the point he was trying to make. Recognizing the growing influence of animation, McCay began to finance his own animated shorts to accompany his chalk talks. The first of these in 1911 was a hand-painted Little Nemo short. McCay's most famous cartoon was easily Gertie the Dinosaur, a cartoon that's still extremely famous and revolutionary even today. If you recognize any of the cartoons we're talking about today, you recognize Gertie the Dinosaur. Now, Gertie is often considered to be animation's first real character. She was sympathetic, attractive, and with a distinct personality. And while you've maybe seen the Gertie animation before, you've never really seen it in its true context. You see, Gertie isn't a story in its own right. Instead, it too was part of McCay's chalk talk act, with the animated dinosaur being intended to appear as if she was a real dinosaur on the screen that McCay had trained to do various tricks.
Now, will you be a good girl and make your bow to the audience? Okay. That's enough. Don't overdo it. Now, raise your right foot. Come on, Gertie. That's good. Now raise your left foot. Your left foot, Gertie. Your left foot. Never mind that sea monster. Your left foot. Come on, Gertie. Now stop acting like a dim-witted dinosaur. Take it easy, Gertie. You're a bad girl. All right. Now stop that crying. Here's a nice pumpkin for you.
McCay would produce a handful of other cartoons, including a recreation of the sinking of the Lusitania that took nearly 2 years to complete. McCay was hardly alone. Other comic artists involved in early animation include Rube Goldberg, whose fanciful drawings of elaborate contraptions meant to do simple, ordinary tasks led to the phrase a Rube Goldberg device. Mutt and Jeff creator Bud Fisher created 300 cartoon installments featuring his famous characters, and Crazy Cat, as created by George Harriman, also had a great deal of early animation success. Despite all of these successful cartoons, animation had not yet found its first original superstar. After all of the characters we've talked about so far were derived from newspaper comic strips. And Gertie the Dinosaur, well, she only ever appeared in that one short, and always alongside McCay. That all changed in 1919 at the Pat Sullivan Animation Studio with the creation of a cat character named Master Tom. By his third cartoon appearance, Master Tom had a new name, derived from the Latin words for happy and cat. He became Felix the Cat, a character based in part on the mannerisms of Charlie Chaplin and possessing a magical, shape-changing tail. Felix was created by animator Otto Mesmer when Paramount, who distributed the Sullivan Studio cartoons, asked for one more cartoon rather last minute. Mesmer thought that a cat would be easiest, and he designed the character with a solid black body that would be easier to animate than the elaborate line drawings of something like Gertie the Dinosaur. He also gave Felix a sort of flexible, almost rubber-like body that would soon become the standard for animated characters. Paramount loved the early Felix cartoons and wanted more. Sullivan ended up promising them a new installment every 2 weeks. The skilled animation, along with Paramount's powerful distribution, soon gave Felix an unprecedented audience for a cartoon character, making him the first cartoon character known across the nation and around the world. He was, in essence, animation's very first superstar. Decades later, Felix would also become television's first star, when a Felix doll was used for all of RCA's earliest broadcasting tests. As popular as Felix was for Sullivan Studios, the leading animation studio of the 1920s was undoubtedly Fleischer Studios, run by brothers Max and Dave Fleischer. The studio made extensive use of the rotoscope, invented by Max Fleischer, in order to create more realistically moving animation. The rotoscope allowed animators to trace over live footage of actors projected onto a glass plate from the other side. They debuted this technique in their Out of the Inkwell series and its first character, Coco the Clown. Beyond the rotoscope, their innovations also included the rotograph, which allowed for cartoon characters to appear on real backgrounds, and the bouncing ball sing-along. These would have required the accompaniment of a band before sound film became the norm. Meanwhile, German filmmaker Lotte Renninger had been inspired by the shadow puppet theater of Thailand. She had been crafting short scenes based on children's books and fairy tales, with a sort of combination of stop-motion animation and drawn animation that mimicked that same shadow puppet theater. Like all of the films we've been talking about, Lotte's earliest films were short films, but then, in 1926, she used her talents to create the world's very first feature-length animated film, with The Adventures of Prince Ahmed. It would be another 11 years before a traditional hand-drawn animated feature film would be made, and the man to make it was Walt Disney. Initially a commercial illustrator, Disney was inspired by Mutt and Jeff and Coco the Clown and began teaching himself animation in the 1920s. His very first animated shorts were released under the banner of Newman's Laugh-O-Grams and were made in Kansas City. Disney would eventually move his whole operation, including key animator and collaborator Ub Iwerks, to California, where they would make the Alice comedies, a series of shorts that combined animation and live action for Margaret Winkler. Margaret had been distributing Out of the Inkwell and Felix the Cat, but having lost both, she needed something new, and she signed Disney to create 6 Alice comedies. To make the films, Walt and his brother Roy created the Disney Brothers Studio, which eventually became the Walt Disney Company. By 1927, Margaret Winkler had retired, turning the animation distribution business over to her husband, Charles Mintz, and Mintz wanted something new. Now, Walt and Ub were tired of the Alice comedies and were eager to transition to fully animated films, and so were happy to oblige. The duo created a new character, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, a pretty straightforward Felix the Cat knockoff. Oswald was moderately successful, and things were looking up for Walt. That is, until Mintz stole away all of Disney's animators and even secured the rights to Oswald the Lucky Rabbit through obscure contract machinations. Only Ub Iwerks remained loyal to Disney, but now Walt, Ub, and Roy were on the back foot. They were soon able to hire new animators, but needed a new character. They started by simply lopping off Oswald's ears and creating a brand new character called Mortimer Mouse. But Walt's wife Lillian didn't like the name Mortimer, and she suggested they change his name to Mickey. Mickey Mouse starred in a pair of extremely unsuccessful pictures, so unsuccessful that no studio would buy them, until Walt combined Mickey with his greatest innovation yet, rocketing them both to fame. Steamboat Willie in 1928 was the first cartoon to feature a truly synchronized soundtrack, with voices and sound effects. Walt had been inspired by the jazz singer and saw sound as the future of cartoons. He even provided the voice of Mickey himself, and would continue to do so until 1947. Steamboat Willie was an enormous success and rocketed both Walt and Mickey to international stardom, quickly outpacing even the fame of Felix the Cat. Disney and his team continued to experiment with combining animation and sound with the Silly Symphony series. First was the Skeleton Dance, animated and directed by Ub Iwerks, with music by Carl Stalling. As Disney's popularity grew, his only true rivals would be the Fleischers, whose cartoons were being distributed by Paramount. They too had been experimenting with adding sound to cartoons, primarily through their popular sing-along cartoons, and enjoyed moderate success in the Felix the Cat Mickey Mouse mold with a character called Bimbo the dog. But the Fleischers' first real star would come from the unexpected popularity of a background character from the 1930 Bimbo cartoon, Dizzy Dishes.
I'm so blue, waiting for you to pass. Oh, I can't go on like
That was, of course, Betty Boop. Now, you might not have noticed it, but if you look carefully at Betty Boop's ears, you'll notice that, at least in her first few appearances, she was meant to be a dog and a love interest for Bimbo. By 1932, though, animators, including Grim Natwick, the animator who had created Betty Boop, had revised her image, turning her from a dog into a human. Interestingly, Betty's first and earliest animated cartoons were designed to promote the songs of African American singers like Louis Armstrong and Cab Calloway.
Folks, now here's a story about Minnie the Moocher. She was a red-hot hoochie coocher. She was the roughest, toughest frail. Minnie had a heart as big as a whale. Hoddy, hoddy, ho. Hoddy, hoddy, ho. Hoddy, hoddy.
Betty was designed to be a caricature of singer and actress Helen Kane, and was even voiced by a runner-up from the Helen Kane Sound-Alike contest. The name Betty Boop even came from Kane's own nickname in the press, where she was called the Boop Girl. Kane was known for her baby-voiced singing style and for her signature song, I Wanna Be Loved by You, which even included the Boop Boop Badoop.
I wanna be loved by you, just you, nobody else but you. I wanna be loved by you, alone. Boop boop badoo.
The likeness was so egregious that Helen Kane eventually sued the Fleischer brothers, but lost in court when it was proven that she, too, had stolen the style and persona from African-American singer Baby Esther. As popular as Betty Boop was, the Fleischers' greatest success was yet to come. Just as Betty had spun off from Bimbo, one of early animation's greatest superstars was about to spin off from a 1933 Betty Boop cartoon.
With your yakahoo, hickey-doo, too.
Now, Popeye was not a new character. He had been created by E.C. Seeger and had been appearing in Seeger's comic strip Thimble Theater for 4 years, and was already so popular with readers that he'd long since supplanted the strip's original main characters. In 1933, Fleischer Studios approached Seeger to start creating cartoons. These cartoons only increased Popeye's already substantial popularity, and Popeye became an animation superstar in no time, quickly rivaling the fame of even Mickey Mouse, with some audience polls suggesting that Popeye was actually the more popular of the two. Popeye was so popular, he even increased spinach sales in the United States by 33%. Paramount Pictures and Fleischer Studios would produce 231 Popeye cartoons in a relatively short amount of time. Several of these would be 2 reel featurettes, at a time when most cartoons were only 1 reel, and were some of the longest and most ambitious cartoons of the time.
I'll get you out of this desert some way. I tank, we go now. Whoa. Water. Oh, boy. Come on, I'll revise you. Here we are.
The popularity of these 2-reelers suggested to the Fleischers that audiences were ready for a feature-length animated film, and the brothers lobbied Paramount for the opportunity for 3 years. But money-conscious Paramount wouldn't budge. Now, Paramount and the Fleischers weren't the only ones trying to follow up on Mickey Mouse's success. In 1929, Warner Brothers Pictures launched their own series of animated cartoons called Looney Tunes. These cartoons were designed not only to compete with Mickey Mouse, but to advertise a record and sheet music publishing company that Warner Brothers had recently bought, hence the name Looney Tunes. Initially, these cartoons starred a now very familiar-looking character type with a character called Bosco, but Warner Brothers soon lost a copyright dispute over Bosco, and so a new character named Buddy became the star of Looney Tunes. The Buddy films were not particularly successful, and Warner soon brought in a new group of animators to try and change things up. Amongst the animators were such soon-to-be influential names as Bob Clampett, Friz Freleng, and Tex Avery. These new young animators didn't like Buddy, and they began experimenting with a new group of characters who were loosely based on the R Gang or Little Rascals characters, including Oliver Owl, Dogs Ham and X, Beans the Cat, and Bean's sidekick, Porky Pig.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear the midnight ride of Paul Revere.
Porky quickly proved much more popular than Beans, and soon became Warner's breakout star. He was initially voiced by Joe Doherty, who actually did stutter. But Doherty couldn't control his stutter, leading to long hours in the sound booth as they needed to get things just right so that the voice and the animation would match up. Doherty was replaced within a year by Mel Blanc, who could stutter on cue.
Goodbye, toots, old gal. Parting is such sweet sorrow. I wish you lots of luck, Mr. Silverfish.
Mel was known as the man of 1,000 voices and was a veteran of old-time radio shows, including the Jack Benny Show, where he improbably provided the sound of Jack Benny's broken-down old Maxwell car.
Can you remember the day you bought your first automobile? I can remember driving mine home, for I had my friend Mel Blanc with me. Mel and I still work together, and I still have the Maxwell.
Mel would be the voice of Porky Pig and most of the other Looney Tunes characters until 1989. Europe in the 1930s was still a place for rampant innovation and experimentation in animation. Take, for example, Alexandre Alexiev, a Russian working in France who created a pin screen perforated by 500,000 moving pins that could be raised or lowered to create patterns of light. It took 2 years for Alexiev using the pin screen to animate A Night in Bald Mountain, which he released in 1933. Oskar Fischinger was a German who eschewed characters altogether, embracing instead color and shape. In 1935, his animated film Composition in Blue won a prize at the Venice Film Festival. Disney, too, continued to experiment and innovate, and in 1937 debuted the multi-plane camera. This special camera was the secret to the realistic depth of image seen in Disney cartoons of the time, and involved separate layers of background painted onto different glass plates that could be moved past the camera at different speeds, creating the effect of a moving horizon as opposed to simply moving past a flat background where all points seem to move at the same time. Take a look at this clip from the 1937 animated short, The Old Mill, and you can see the foreground and background moving at different speeds, creating an almost 3D effect. While not necessarily the first multiplane camera, Disney's was arguably the most impressive, able to handle 7 different plates at the same time and with heightened precision. Like the Fleischers, Disney too was interested in creating a feature-length cartoon, and in 1934 began work on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. If successful, the film would increase the studio's revenues and prestige immensely, but it was also a huge gamble. There had never been anything like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs before, and even something like The Adventures of Prince Ahmed was really only seen in Europe and was considered not to be mainstream commercial fare. When contemplating the budget, Walt figured that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs would cost $250,000, 10 times the budget of a Silly Symphony short. In reality, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs cost $1.5 million to make. To put that in perspective, in 1933, King Kong cost less than half that amount. Walt was keen for the risk, though, and even ended up mortgaging his house to finance the film. His wife and his brother tried to talk him out of it, but Walt pressed ahead. Throughout Hollywood, the film was called Walt's Folly. No one thought that it could work, and no one thought that a cartoon could provide realistic human emotions besides funny animal comedy, let alone hold on to an audience for an entire feature film. December 21st, 1937 was the night of the premiere, and Walt sat in the audience, nervous, wondering what the fate of his picture would be. That premiere screening of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was met with rapturous applause, not just from Disney's critics who were in attendance, but also from Hollywood's elite. Judy Garland, Marlene Dietrich, Charles Lawton, and others were all in attendance. The New York Times review read simply, "Thank you very much, Mr. Disney." Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs quickly became a worldwide sensation, making $8 million at the box office, more than 4 times the amount made by any other picture that year, and easily making it the most successful sound film of all time up to that point. Disney certainly received the money and prestige he thought, allowing him to continue to make not only more shorts, but more feature films. And over the next 5 years, Disney would release Pinocchio, Dumbo, Bambi, and Fantasia, which included segments inspired by Night on Bald Mountain and Composition in Blue. And Disney has continued this sort of popular animation dominance to this day, when Frozen 2 has recently become the most successful animated film of all time. Not long after the release of Snow White, the Fleischer Studios folded. They had attempted their own feature film with Gulliver's Travels, which, while successful, put the studio deeply into debt and added to a growing personal strain between brothers Dave and Max.
This is a job for Superman.
Not even a new, well-regarded and influential series of Superman shorts could save them. They would cease production in 1940 and be absorbed into Paramount Pictures. Warner Brothers in 1937, meanwhile, debuted their second star, when Daffy Duck appeared in a Porky Pig cartoon. Soon after, the Warner's animators began experimenting with a rabbit character.
All the world was gay, swinging on its way. Things were looking brighter day by day. Nothing ever wrong, life was just a song, till that Looney Tune came along. I'm going cuckoo, here comes the choo-choo.
That short and some of the other early rabbit shorts was directed by Ben Bugs Hardaway, and the model sheet for the unnamed character unsurprisingly read Bugs's Bunny. It was quickly adopted as the character's name. He would be refined over several cartoons, ditching the unhinged, crazy personality for a sly, crafty wit and propensity to handle carrots like cigars, apparently adapted in part from Clark Gable's role in It Happened One Night.
Scores, huh?
They'll stop all right. It's all a matter of knowing how to handle them.
Oh, and you're an expert, I suppose.
Expert? I'm going to write a book about it. Call it The Hitchhiker's Hail.
There's no end to your accomplishments, isn't there?
You think it's simple, huh?
No, no.
Well, it is simple. It's all that old thumb, see?
Bugs's popularity would be meteoric, and he would become the only cartoon character of the era with the same lasting fame as Mickey Mouse.
Too bad. Too bad. Oh, well. Oh, bury me now. Out the Lone Prairie. Oh, do you lay where the wild coyotes will howl on me? Oh, do you lay? Gosh, ain't I a stinker?
As Bugs's popularity grew, World War II was now fast approaching, and the animation studios would soon pitch wholeheartedly into the national war effort. But that's a story for another time, which, incidentally, you can learn all about in another one of our online classes, Hollywood Goes to War, which is already available on the Movie Man Eric YouTube channel. I want to thank you very much for joining me for this look at early animation. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, and subscribe. You can also email me directly at eric@northmetrotv.com to let me know what you thought of the class, or to join our email list so that you know about future upcoming classes and when we are able to begin doing these classes live and in person once again. Still, I'm committed to continuing to offer these classes here online at the Movie Man Eric YouTube channel for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, I want to thank you very much for watching and enjoying the class. Please stay safe, and we'll see you next time.